Both home buyers and home sellers have remained cautious in our marketplace in the month of April. And while we saw the number of sales increasing slightly relative to March and also the number of new listings increasing slightly relative to March, the total number of sales in the month of April were down 24% relative to this time last year. So what exactly is happening in our market now and how is this impacting prices? I'm Adina with Adina YVR Vancouver Real Estate Group and Oaken Realty here with your May 2025 market update. Let's jump right into the numbers and take a look at what's going on. In the month of April, Greater Vancouver Realtors reported just over 2,160 home sales on the MLS. This is an increase of almost 3.5% relative to March, but it's a decrease of almost 24% relative to this time last year. And relative to the 10-year sales average for the month of April, we're down 28%. Looking at this by property type, we see that the biggest decline was in the detached market, where we saw sales declining 29% relative to this time last year. For attached townhomes and duplexes, sales declined about 24% relative to this time last year. And for condo apartments, sales declined about 20% relative to this time last year. Looking at this from a historical context, it's unusual to see sales so suppressed in what's typically a busy spring market. But if you're paying attention to the news in the month of April, this shouldn't come as a surprise. Although borrowing costs were coming down, we faced the imminent threat of a trade war with our biggest trade partner in the US, and we were also anxiously waiting to see what would happen in the election. So with those factors at play, it shouldn't be surprising that we've seen sales suppressed relative to what we've seen in past years. On the supply side, we had 6,850 homes newly listed for sale on the MLS in Metro Vancouver in the month of April. This is an increase of 6% relative to the previous month in March, but it's a decrease of 3% relative to this time last year. And relative to the 10-year sales average for the month of April, we're up about 19.5%. This brought our total supply and inventory available for purchase to 16,207 homes on the MLS. This is an increase of 11% relative to the previous month. It's an increase of 30% relative to this time last year, and it's an increase of 48% relative to the 10-year sales average for the month of April. Buyers finally have a record amount of inventory to choose from, and this number has been increasing over the last few months. So with these record inventory levels, are we finally in buyer's market territory? Well, the answer depends on what submarket you're looking in, but when we look at Metro Vancouver as a whole, we're technically still in balanced market territory. What determines buyers or sellers markets is a sales to active listings ratio, which again looks at the number of sales in a given month divided by the active listings left over at the end of that month. When this ratio is above 21% for a sustained period of time, we're typically in seller's market territory. And when this ratio is below 12% for a sustained period of time, we're typically in buyer's market territory. Anything in between is balanced market territory. And in the month of April, our market was at 13.8%. So we're in balanced market territory, but we are edging a little bit closer to that buyer's market, and we're down about 1% relative to where we were in March and February. Looking at this by property type, we see that the ratio is currently in buyer's market territory for detached homes at 9.9%, and this is down 0.4% relative to March. For attached townhomes and duplexes, the market has shifted from seller's market territory to balanced market territory with a ratio of 17.5%, and this is down 3% relative to March. For condo apartments, this segment remains in balanced market territory with a ratio of 15.7%, and this is down 0.4% relative to March. But what we're seeing right now is reminiscent of what we've seen in the past few years, is that different submarkets behave differently based on the product type, neighborhood, and especially the price point. When we look at the downtown market, it's interesting to see that inventory only increased 2% last month, whereas sales increased 33%. And what we're seeing is a big variance in the percentage of where sales are happening based on price point. For example, in the downtown market under $700,000, we had 32% of our sales were under that $700,000 mark, yet only 26% of our inventory is in that range. So for the submarket of condos under $700,000 downtown, the sales to active listings ratio is currently 17%, which is a very healthy balanced market territory. But if we look at this ratio over $1.5 million, we only had 31 sales and we have 351 active listings. This brings us to a sales to active listings ratio of 9%. So what we see is that higher end of the downtown market is in buyer's market territory, whereas the lower end is in very healthy balanced market territory. And we see this trend play out across many different submarkets. For example, let's take a look at the west side of Vancouver, the detached home segment. Of the 51 home sales that we had last month, 29% of those sales were in the price point under $3.5 million. So that means 57% of the sales that happened on the west side were under $3.5 million. yet only 26% of the inventory is under $3.5 million. So under that $3.5 million price benchmark, we're at 15% sales active listings ratio, which is technically balanced market territory. But if we're looking at price points over $3.5 million, we're at only 4% sales active listings ratio. Looking at the attached segment on the west side of Vancouver, we see a similar trend. Of the 185 home sales that we had in the month of April, 146 of those sales were under $1.25 million. So 79% of the sales were under that price threshold, yet only 53% of the inventory is in that same price band. So for condos and attached properties under $1.25 million, the sales active listings ratio is 25%, which is technically seller's market territory. But when we're looking at condos and attached homes over $1.25 million, the sales active listings ratio is only 7%. So it's definitely in buyer's market territory. Looking at the east side of Vancouver for detached homes, we see a similar trend. Of the 67 sales that we saw in the month of April, 55 of those were under $2.25 million. So that's 82% of the sales happening under that price threshold, whereas only 51% of the inventory was in that same price band. So for detached homes under $2.25 million, we're technically at 17% sales active listings ratio, or a very healthy balanced market. But over $2.25 million, the sales active listings ratio is only 4%. So again, buyer's market territory. And looking at condos on the east side of Vancouver, again, a similar trend. Of the 132 condos that sold in the month of April, 113 of those were under $1 million. So that's 86% of the total sales, whereas only 76% of the inventory was under that same price band. So for condos and attached properties under $1 million, we're currently at 20% sales active listings ratio, which is on the cusp of a seller's and balanced market. But condos and apartments over $1 million are currently at 11% sales active listing ratio, or a buyer's market. And these kind of nuances and details are exactly what you need to be paying attention to if you're looking to buy or sell in this marketplace. For example, while the market is technically in balanced market territory and some segments are in buyer's market territory, we had 5 different clients in multiple offers over the last month. So you really need to know what's going on with the sub-market that you're looking to buy or sell in. So how is all of this impacting prices? The HPI composite benchmark price for all property types was $1,184,500 in the month of April. This is a decrease of 0.5% relative to March, and it's a decline of 1.8% relative to this time last year. Looking at this broken down by property type, we see that for detached homes, the HPI benchmark price is currently $2,021,800. This represents a decrease of 0.6% relative to March, and it's a decrease of 0.7% relative to this time last year. For attached townhomes and duplexes, the HPI benchmark price is currently $1,102,300, and this is a decline of 1% relative to March, and it's a decline of 2.9% relative to April last year. For condo apartments, the HPI benchmark price is currently $762,800. This is a decline of 0.6% relative to March, and it's a decline of 2% relative to April last year. So what does all of this mean to you if you're looking to buy or sell in Greater Vancouver in the coming months? Well, the main message is clear that we're in balanced market territory and buyers finally have more selection to choose from than we've had in years, and they have more negotiating ability right now in this market. But as I mentioned previously, it really depends on the property type and neighborhood. While we're seeing some clients still in multiple offer situations, whether it's on their listings or on their purchase, we're seeing other clients coming in with subject to sale offers and other listings that are taking a long time to show and aren't getting a lot of activity. So what's really important right now is that you consult with your realtor and really figure out what's going on in the submarket that you're looking to buy or sell in. Generally speaking, this is a great market for buyers looking to get into the market and buyers who are looking to sell their properties and move up the market. It's not the best market typically for downsizing or for investors who are looking to sell. If you're thinking of making a move and would like to schedule a consultation, you could do so by clicking the link below here if you're watching this on YouTube, or you could click the link in my bio if you're watching this on Instagram. And to stay up to date with what's happening in the market, be sure to hit subscribe here on YouTube and follow me on Instagram at adina.yvr. Have a great rest of the month, and I can't wait to see you in June.